The police station in downtown Hartford, Connecticut, was unusually quiet that Thursday evening. The hum of old fluorescent lights filled the silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of a desk sergeant's fingers on a keyboard. Then the glass door creaked open. A young man, maybe in his late 20s, stepped in. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, and his body trembling as though he had been fighting with himself all day before deciding to come here. "My name's Mike Carter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to, I need to tell someone the truth. It's about my mom, Annie Carter." The officer behind the desk blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. Annie Carter. That name still carried weight in this small New England town. More than 2 decades ago, Annie had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance had sparked a frenzy. Local news crews, missing person flyers, and whispers of foul play. The case eventually went cold, leaving behind only speculation and broken memories for those who had known her. But here was her son, grown now, standing in front of the police as if carrying the ghost of his mother in his eyes. The sergeant motioned for him to sit down. "Take a breath, son. Start from the beginning. What do you mean the truth about your mom?" Mike sat, gripping the edges of the chair. His knuckles turned white. "She's alive," he said. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy, unbelievable. "She never died. She's been hiding all these years. And she made me promise that my father could never know." To understand how such a statement could make sense, we have to go back. Back to 1999, when Annie Carter was still a vibrant young woman in her early 30s. Neighbors described her as the kind of mom every kid wished they had. Warm, funny, and always the first to show up at a school bake sale. She had married James Carter, a well-respected mechanic in the town. To outsiders, they looked like a solid working-class family, a couple building their lives together with their young son, Mike. But inside the Carter household, things were different. Friends would later recall subtle signs. Annie showing up with long sleeves in the middle of summer, her laughter sounding a little too forced, and her close friend Karen spending more and more time at their house. Karen Miles was Annie's best friend since high school, the kind of woman who knew all the details of Annie's life, the good and the bad. She was also one of the few people Annie confided in when James's temper started to escalate from yelling to slamming doors, and from slamming doors to bruises hidden under scarves. In March of 2000, Annie vanished. No note, no goodbye, just gone. One morning, James said he woke up and found her side of the bed empty. Her clothes, some personal belongings, even her favorite necklace, all missing. He told police he had no idea where she went. For weeks, search parties combed the woods surrounding Hartford. Dogs were brought in, helicopters flew overhead, and posters with Annie's smiling face appeared on telephone poles and gas stations across town. Despite all this, no trace was found. James Carter was questioned extensively. The community whispered about him. He must have snapped, some said. But without a body, without evidence, there was nothing police could charge him with. Eventually, the case faded into the category every detective hates: unresolved. Young Mike grew up under a shadow. To his classmates, he was the boy whose mom disappeared. His father raised him, but the absence was glaring. Karen, always nearby, became a kind of surrogate mother. She cooked meals, took Mike to baseball games, and told him stories about Annie so he wouldn't forget. But even as a child, Mike felt something in Karen's eyes, like she was holding on to a secret too big for her to share. Back in the police station now, Mike's confession poured out. "All these years, I thought my mom was dead. I thought my dad killed her, or that she ran away and didn't care about me anymore. But 2 weeks ago, I saw her. I actually saw her. She's alive. She's been living under another name, just an hour away from here." The detective leaned forward. "How did you find her?" Mike hesitated, his voice breaking. "Karen told me. She finally couldn't keep it in anymore. She said my mom reached out to her years ago, right after she disappeared. She was scared for her life, scared of my dad. She begged Karen not to tell anyone, not even me, and Karen kept that promise. Until now. Mike buried his face in his hands. When I saw her, she looked at me and said, "He cannot know I'm alive, Mike. Not ever." And she made me promise to keep it from him. But I can't live with this. I had to tell someone. I had to come here. The station was silent. A cold realization swept through the room. Annie Carter hadn't been a cold case victim. She had been a fugitive of her own life, hiding in plain sight. And now her son was carrying the unbearable weight of her secret. The detective wrote slowly in his notebook, the pen scratching against paper. "All right, Mike, start from the beginning. Tell us everything you know. Every detail. Don't leave anything out." Mike exhaled shakily. His story was just beginning. To understand the weight of Mike's confession, detectives needed context. Why would a woman abandon her life, her son, her identity, and spend decades pretending to be dead? The answer lay in the private hell Annie Carter had endured. In the late 1990s, James Carter was known as a hardworking man. He owned a small auto repair shop and was praised for being reliable with his customers. But behind closed doors, he was volatile. Annie had been only 19 when she married him, swept up by his charm, his promise of stability, and the way he made her feel chosen in a world that often overlooked young women without college degrees. By her early 30s, she had learned the other side of James: controlling, violent, unpredictable. Neighbors remembered muffled arguments through the thin walls of their duplex. Annie would show up at Karen's doorstep late at night, sometimes with a split lip or a shaky voice. "He just loses it," she'd say, "but he always apologizes after." Karen would sit her down, make tea, and remind her that she didn't deserve this. Still, Annie always went back. She loved Mike too much to risk leaving without a plan. Karen became more than a friend. She was Annie's lifeline. She was the only person Annie trusted with the truth. And when Annie finally decided she couldn't take it anymore, it was Karen she turned to. In March of 2000, Annie told Karen something she hadn't told anyone else. "I'm leaving. Tonight. If I stay, James is going to kill me. I can feel it." Karen's first instinct was to call the police, but Annie refused. "You don't know him like I do," she whispered, her voice shaking. "If I involve the police, it'll only get worse. He'll find me. He'll take Mike from me. I have to disappear." Karen sat in stunned silence as Annie laid out her plan. She had secretly saved cash from odd jobs, squirreled away in an old cookie tin. She had memorized the details of a new identity she purchased from a shady acquaintance in another town. And she had chosen a place, a women's shelter an hour away, that would help her start over. But here was the hardest part. Annie couldn't take Mike with her. He was only 7 years old, and leaving him in James's custody tore her apart. But Annie feared that if she ran with him, James would track them down, and her son would end up in the crossfire. Karen recalled Annie crying uncontrollably that night, clinging to her. "Promise me if something happens, you'll take care of him. Don't ever let him think I didn't love him. Tell him I had no choice." And then Annie was gone. The police investigation at the time was thorough, but they missed one crucial detail. Karen knew more than she let on. When detectives interviewed her, she stuck to the script Annie had begged her to follow. "No, I don't know where she went." No, she didn't say anything about leaving. She convinced them she was as blindsided as everyone else. And when suspicion turned toward James, Karen was there too, reminding investigators that Annie had once spoken about wanting a fresh start. Years went by. Karen practically became Mike's second mother, stepping in for school plays, cooking dinner when James was working late, and offering the boy the kind of tenderness his father couldn't. To the world, she was simply being a devoted family friend. But inside, she carried the burden of Annie's secret. Annie, meanwhile, was living under a new name, Anna Miller. She found work as a seamstress in a small town just outside Hartford. At first, she lived in constant fear, jumping at every knock on the door, convinced James would appear. But months turned to years. The fear dulled, though it never fully went away. She never remarried, never had more children. She lived quietly, invisibly, her only connection to her old life being the occasional letter she sent to Karen. Those letters were careful. Annie never disclosed her location outright, but she shared updates. I'm safe. I found work. I think of Mike every day. Karen kept them hidden, never telling anyone, even as she watched Mike grow up without his mother, carrying silent resentment toward his father. Mike later told detectives that growing up, he always felt something was off. His father rarely spoke of Annie, and when he did, it was with bitterness. She abandoned us. She didn't care. Karen, on the other hand, told a different story, softened memories of Annie's laughter, her love, her devotion. The contradiction confused Mike, but as a boy, he had no way to unravel the truth. By the time Mike was a teenager, rumors about his father's guilt were almost accepted as fact. People whispered that James must have killed Annie and gotten away with it. Though there was no evidence, the stigma clung to the Carter family. Mike lived with the weight of suspicion directed at his father and the ache of never knowing what really happened to his mother. And then 2 decades later, Karen broke her silence. She had kept the secret for so long, it felt like part of her identity. But watching Mike struggle as an adult, watching him spiral into drinking, depression, and anger, finally broke her. One night she called him over. He expected another lecture about straightening out his life. Instead, she handed him a faded envelope. Inside was one of Annie's old letters, written in the looping, careful handwriting he remembered from childhood notes in his lunchbox. Mike, Karen said softly, there's something you need to know. Your mother didn't die. She didn't abandon you either. She's alive. Mike stared at her, the letter shaking in his hands. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke, but as Karen explained everything, the night Annie left, the letters, the promise she made, he realized the truth he had been denied his entire life. A week later, Karen arranged for him to meet Annie. That meeting, that moment when he saw her again after 2 decades, would change everything. Mike sat in the small, windowless interview room of the Hartford Police Department, his fingers laced tightly together, as if holding himself from falling apart. Across from him, Detective Harris leaned forward, elbows on the table. You said you saw her, your mother. Tell me about that moment. Mike swallowed hard. His throat felt raw, like he'd been speaking all night. It was, surreal. I didn't recognize her at first. She goes by Anna now, Anna Miller. She has short hair, gray streaks. She looks older, of course. But when she smiled, he broke off, blinking back tears. That was my mom. I knew instantly. The meeting had taken place in a quiet diner off a back road just outside of town. Karen had arranged it, trembling as though she herself were doing something forbidden. Mike had walked in, scanning the booths, until he saw a woman sitting alone with a cup of coffee. For a moment, he thought it couldn't be her. Then she lifted her head, and their eyes met. Mike, she whispered, her voice cracking with 20 years of absence. He froze, unable to move, before stumbling into her arms. Customers in the diner turned their heads, puzzled by the tearful reunion happening in front of them. But for Mike, the world had collapsed into that single moment. But joy quickly gave way to something darker. She was so nervous, Mike told the detective, kept glancing at the door, checking her watch, like she was afraid someone had followed me. When I asked why she left, why she never came back for me, she just shook her head and said, "He cannot know I'm alive." Detective Harris tapped his pen. She was talking about your father. Mike nodded. Yeah, she said he would never stop looking for her if he knew. That he'd rather kill her than let her live without him. She told me the night she left, he nearly strangled her. Karen helped her escape before it was too late. She begged me to understand. Annie explained everything in hushed tones over cold coffee. The abuse, the threats, the nights she thought she wouldn't survive. She told Mike that James had once whispered in her ear, "If you ever try to leave me, you'll disappear for real. No one will ever find you." Those words had haunted her for years. Mom said she couldn't take me because it wasn't safe, that if she had, he'd track us down, and it would have ended in blood. She thought leaving me behind was the only way to keep me alive, and she made Karen swear never to reveal she was still alive. Mike clenched his fists as he spoke. All these years, I thought she abandoned me. I hated her for it. But when I saw the fear in her eyes, I realized she had been protecting me the whole time. She said she followed my life from a distance through Karen. Every birthday, every milestone she knew, but she could never risk stepping out of the shadows. The detective scribbled notes, but his face was tight. So why now? Why tell you after all this time? Mike's voice cracked. She said she's tired of hiding. She's older now, and the fear hasn't left her. But she wanted me to know she didn't just vanish out of neglect. She wanted me to know she loved me. That was the whole point of meeting. He looked down at his hands. But she still made me promise, never tell my dad. She said if he found out she was alive, it would destroy everything. Mike's confession hung in the air of that police station. The case of Annie Carter had sat cold for over 2 decades, filed away as an unresolved disappearance. Now the truth was stranger than anyone had imagined. Annie wasn't buried in the woods. She wasn't dumped in a river. She was alive, living quietly in the next town, her very existence a secret guarded by fear. The irony was bitter. James Carter, long suspected by neighbors and whispered about at bars, had never faced charges because there was no body. All those years he had carried the reputation of a killer without the proof. And now the proof was sitting in a diner, sipping coffee, breathing. But still, Annie refused to let the system expose him, not because she wanted to protect him, but because she wanted to protect herself. Detective Harris finally spoke. Mike, you understand the position this puts us in. If your mother is alive, we need to verify. We need to hear from her directly. Mike shook his head violently. She won't come here. She won't testify. She told me she'll vanish again if anyone tries to drag her into the open. And I believe her. She's lived like this for 20 years. She'll do it again. Harris sighed. So what do you want from us? Why come forward? Mike stared at the table. Because I couldn't carry it anymore. Knowing the truth, seeing her alive, and pretending she's dead for everyone else. It's tearing me apart. I wanted it written down, somewhere official. So at least when people talk about Annie Carter, they'll know she didn't just walk away because she didn't care. She was surviving. Later that night, Mike walked out of the station, his steps unsteady. The streets of Hartford were quiet, a thin mist curling around the lampposts. He thought about his father, older now, still working at the shop, still bearing the label of a man who probably did it. He thought about his mother sitting alone in her small apartment, living in the shadows of her own life. And he thought about Karen, who had carried a secret that nearly consumed her. In the end, there was no neat ending. No handcuffs, no courtroom, no justice that tied everything into a clean bow. There was only the haunting truth. Annie Carter was alive. She had saved herself the only way she knew how. And she had left behind a family forever fractured, a son torn between love and rage, and a friend who bore the unbearable weight of silence. Mike's final words to the detectives echoed like a warning. She said it again before I left. He cannot know I'm alive. And I believe her. If he ever does, it'll be the end of her.